Let's get back to Sports and Torts with David Spada and Elliott Harris on TalkZone.com.
Elliott, when you think of baseball, people have had effects on the game of baseball. You think of players, managers, management, but this gentleman, our next guest, he had one of the biggest influences in baseball in the last probably 50 years. He changed the whole way it operates.
No question about it. No question he should be in the Hall of Fame either.
Marvin Miller, how you doing, Mr. Miller?
Just fair, thank you.
So, how did you get involved with baseball back in the 60s?
Well, I was working with a committee of people from the Steelworkers Union where I was employed, and the Kaiser Steel Company, and we had a tripartite committee. It was chaired by Dr. George Taylor, who was from the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania, one of the best-known of the early arbitrators in labor management relations. He and I got on the same elevator going to the same meeting, and he asked me, do you know Robin Roberts? And I said, no, but I know who he is, of course. And he's a great pitcher of the Phillies. And I said, well, why do you ask? And from there, he told me that there was a committee of players who were troubled by conditions in baseball, and especially in their pension plan, and they wanted somebody who was familiar with actuarial calculations and pension plan and negotiations to help them. And before the elevator got us to the floor we were going, he wanted to know if I was interested. And I said, I really don't know, but I would be willing to talk with them. And so he put me in touch with what the players called a search committee, which consisted of Roberts and Jim Bunning and Harvey Keene and a Pittsburgh pitcher, Bob Friend. And I met with them. Taylor put us in touch with each other. And I met with them in Cleveland just before Christmas 1965. And it went on from there. That was the first contact with Major League Baseball.
Now, growing up in the Bronx, were you a Yankees fan? Or a baseball
No,
fan at all?
I did not grow up in the Bronx. I was born in the Bronx.
Okay.
But my parents bought a house in Brooklyn when I was about a year old. So I don't remember the Bronx at all from that period. But to answer your question, of course I was a baseball fan. I lived not too far from Ebbets Field. And from the time I was really very small, like everybody else, like in Brooklyn, I collected cards and memorabilia about players. And finally, when I was about 10 or 11 years old, I talked my father into letting me go to Ebbets Field alone. And it was only 3 subway stops. And I was a Brooklyn fan. Used to go there whenever there were doubleheaders and stand in line for a bleacher seat and so on. And I found it useful later on when people ask me, how did you get interested in baseball? They're asking me about my connection with it as an adult. And the shorthand answer was, I lived in Brooklyn, not far from Ebbets Field, and everybody understood from that point on why I was interested in baseball.
So that's why you basically hooked up with Sandy Koufax and Drysdale when they were holding out, because you said, you know what, I got to protect my favorite players.
Well, I didn't really hook up with them. I wasn't yet employed in the spring of '66, but I knew about the joint holdout, and I wished them well, but I had no official duties yet. And in fact, I didn't meet Koufax or Drysdale in spring training on my first go-around in the spring of '66 because they were holding out. And first time I met Sandy was at the All-Star game that year in St. Louis. And I met him. He pitched, I think, the first 3 innings and was his usual brilliant self. And it was one of the hottest days on record. And people were fainting all over the stadium. And the stretcher bearers were running around. And I apparently didn't look too comfortable, but people told me to take shelter in the National League's dressing room because it was air conditioned. And so I went down there, and there was no one in the room except Koufax, and that's where I met him.
I remember that day, having grown up in St. Louis, and it was about as hot as it ever got there. The heat, the humidity.
It was just awful. Yeah, I was wearing a short sleeve shirt, and I'd forget every once in a while, put my arms on the railing of the seat, and
ouch,
jump from the burn.
How did you get elected head of the MLBPA back in '66?
Well, it's really quite a long story, but let me cut to the chase. The search committee was favorably impressed, and they nominated me. They recommended me for nomination to what they called their executive board, which was the elected player reps of each club, and I was nominated by them, and I accepted the nomination, and I said I didn't think they should vote until I had an opportunity to visit and meet with them all, until the vote was postponed because the appointment was conditional upon all of the players voting. And what I didn't even know at the time was that in addition to the players, there was the coaches, the managers, and the trainers, some of whom were considered management employees, and they were voting too. At any rate, I made the trip, met all the players, talked with each club in the spring of '66, and was elected by a vote of 489 to 136. And that's how.
Did the owners and the representatives know what to make of you at first?
Not really. Not really. There was a vast non-understanding of what a union was and what its function was and what was going on. The management reacted as you might expect most managements to react. They got very nervous, and they began propagandizing every place where I would go. And they would tell the players that you can't vote for this guy. It's going to be ruled by the Teamsters. How the hell that came in, I don't know. The Teamsters had nothing to do with it. And it's going to be gangsters, and it's going to be all kinds of things, and you can't vote for this guy. So the presidents of each league and other officials from the commissioner's office were making the rounds both ahead of me and behind me to make sure the players didn't vote for me. But it didn't work.
When you negotiated the first CBA, you got the minimum salary increase from $6,000 to $10,000. The players must have loved you when you did that.
Well, it wasn't just that. We negotiated an entirely new pension plan. You know, the pension plan had been in effect for 19 years at that point. And in one negotiation, we doubled and more than doubled every single benefit, both health care and retirement and widow's benefits and disability benefits and everything. So it was, I know everybody talks about the minimum salary going from 6 to 10. That's accurate. That was it was ridiculous, you know. The first minimum salary was in 1947, and it was $5,000 a year. So 19 years later, they had managed to raise it $1,000 a year, and some of the worst inflationary years that we have on record. And but that was just one of the things we did. It was the beginning of negotiating a whole recognition agreement that the union represented as the sole representative of all of the players, and we in the first negotiations they agreed on a study of the reserve clause, see if there were alternatives to it, because I raised the issue immediately, and lots more was accomplished. It would be too long to tell you, but it was the things you've mentioned were important, but there were other important things too.
Now, Andy Messersmith, Dave McNally played without a signed contract. Whose idea was that, and why did the ball clubs allow that? Did they not see that something down the road could be happening?
Well, there was nothing they could do about it. You have to understand that the reserve clause, which made all of them pieces of property, was really a phony thing. It never really provided that players were captive for their whole careers. They just pretended to be, because what it said was, everybody was under one-year contracts in those days. And what it said was, when your contract expires, the management ownership can renew the contract without your signature for one additional year. And that's all it said. Now, one additional year is not a lifetime. And you don't have to be a genius to know that. And the first time I saw that, I recognized that this clause is going to fall. And when you talk about Messersmith McNally, it's very simple. There were players before them who considered this, but who were bought out by management sometimes on the last day of the season. But what happened with Andy Messersmith, he had been a really top-notch pitcher, first in the American League with the California Angels, where he had won 20 games a number of times, and then he had been traded to the Dodgers, where he won 19 games in his first year with them, and he was simply unhappy with the contract that they were offering him.
Did the owners realize when you got arbitration as part of the collective bargaining agreement what was going to happen, that these salaries were going to start rising?
I can't tell you what the owners knew or did not know.
Did you envision it?
I'm sorry?
Did you see that happening, that these salaries would keep escalating to the amount that they did?
Of course. You have to understand that getting rid of the reserve clause was not a one-day proposition. First of all, the players had to understand that the so-called lifetime control was a phony. They had to understand that it was a winning thing to get rid of it. It's very hard to explain to people who have been indoctrinated to believe that it's wonderful just to be a major leaguer. And when you would say to them that they were exploited and really unmercifully, in 1966, when I came in, the average major league salary was $19,000 a year. And the minimum was $6,000, and there was a ceiling on what you could earn at 100. And no matter if you were Babe Ruth or Stan Musial or Ted Williams or anybody, they had this illegal ceiling on salaries, and I mean illegal under the antitrust laws. And you tell players who are indoctrinated to believe that that's the best of all possible worlds, that you can't have any dignity to a relationship You can't have any power in your collective bargaining as long as they control where you play, and you have no say about it, and when you play, and if they can bar you from baseball. People, even of that day, did not understand that a player who was put on one of the inactive lists for disciplinary reasons could not play in organized baseball anywhere, not in the United States, not in Canada, not in Puerto Rico, not in Mexico, not in the Dominican Republic, not in Venezuela, not in Japan, nowhere. They were barred from the only profession they knew. And this was a constant threat over every player. And in that kind of situation, you can't bargain as an equal, no matter who you are. You just can't. And as Joe DiMaggio found a few years later, even one of the greatest players of his time and of other times, they treat it like a piece of property.
Yeah.
And but when you told players how exploited they were, how they were underpaid, it's hard for them to understand and believe you until you get an example. And actually, the grievance of Catfish Hunter the year before the Messersmith case was the key to unlocking the players' understanding, because while the Hunter case only involved Hunter because it was a failure to respect his contract, it didn't change anything for anybody else. But when Hunter became a free agent because of an arbitrator's decision, he was one of the premier players in the American League. He was getting $100,000 a year, and then in the first few weeks after he became a free agent, the offers went up to $3 million, a 5-year guaranteed contract, and that did the trick. Players immediately understood that what I was saying was I was telling them the truth, that they have badly underpaid, that you can't negotiate a legitimate contract when you're a piece of property. But look what happens when you're free. And so the Hunter case was extremely important. Messersmith called me to say that he was in disagreement with Walter O'Malley about what O'Malley was offering him, and they had eventually notified him that they had renewed his contract without his signature, and he wanted to know what that meant. And so I explained to him that if he wanted, he could play without signing a contract, because he now had a contract that was renewed. It was a perfectly legitimate contract. And he said, well, if I play without a contract, what happens? I said, what happens is, they won't tell you this, but what happens is their right to renew you for 1 year will run out at the end of the year. And I am convinced that if we can change the grievance procedure so that instead of the owner's employee, the commissioner, who was paid and recruited by the owners, a most improper arbitrator of a dispute between owners and player, a conflict of interest that's as glaring as an open garage, that if we can change that and get an impartial arbitrator approved by both sides who will make final and binding decisions, I'm confident that we're going to overturn the reserve clause. The 1 year is 1 year, and that's it. And after that, you're a free agent. Extend the 1 year to another 1 year. And so he didn't sign it. And more happened after that, but I've given you the basic facts of what happened there. He went the entire season of 1975, I guess, without signing it. He played under a contract that had been renewed without his signature. And he was his grievance was that he was a free agent. And the owners were disputing that. And what the arbitrator said merely is that 1 year is 1 year. And it wasn't a startling decision at all.
Now, before Messersmith and McNally, there was the case of Curt Flood, and that went to the Supreme Court, and he lost. Was there something that Flood could have done to have won?
I don't think so. I kept, I was in close touch with Curt Flood all that period, and I worried about the star center fielder of our time after Willie Mays. I worried that he was going to end his career with a lawsuit, and I worried that it was a fruitless thing because the court had already ruled that baseball was not covered by the antitrust laws. It had ruled that 3 times already. And if there's one thing about the court, they hate to second guess themselves. And so, they have a doctrine called stare decisis, which all means that basically let the prior decision stand. And I kept telling Curt that it was going to be fruitless, and it worried me that he would be ending his career because if he sued baseball, he'd be out for an unknown length of time. And, he was getting to be 31 years old, and that's a very difficult sport to play. And you don't just readapt to star quality play after being out several years. And it could be several years. It happened that it wasn't several years, but it could have been. And I did not think we could win the case, and I told Curt that.
But you you can understand from his perspective of feeling like an indentured servant.
Absolutely. Look, my admiration for Curt Flood is second to no one. He's a man of principle, a man of integrity, and a man who understood what civil rights and civil liberties were. And he was very concerned, not just about himself, but about his teammates and players yet to come. And his concerns were real, and they were not put on. And he said he understood the possibilities of the end of his career that I was outlining, but he was going to do it anyway.
Do you think the tide has turned too far in the players' favor now, where the salaries are way too high and out of proportion to basically what the average American earns?
Let me tell you about that. I mean, people say that all the time. And these are people who believe in our economic system. They have this crazy, abject faith in the profit system and the market controlling everything, and that the market tells you who is valuable and who isn't and how valuable. And they say that about everything except baseball. And, if they look at people, other people in various fields who make millions of dollars and sometimes tens of millions of dollars in 1 year, they think that's fine. That shows that we have a great profit system. And somehow a baseball player that doesn't earn what he's paid. Let me explain that the baseball player is under the most terrific check and balance system that other people aren't, and I will explain. If a chief executive officer of a major corporation, a CEO, wants his compensation adjusted, he goes to his board of directors, most of whom he has appointed. You understand?
Yes.
Yes.
And sometimes it's called a compensation committee of several board members, all of whom he has appointed. And they make the determination of what he should get. Sometimes millions and millions of dollars per year, sometimes more than that as a severance payment for an executive who has failed. And all of this is done by fellow executives from other corporations whom he has appointed, and they don't pay for it, obviously. These strangers who are really in a conflict of interest because they would like to see executive salaries go through the sky because they are executives themselves, they vote what he should get, and then the stockholders who have no voice pay for it. Now, if you ever saw a distribution system that was meant for inequities, that's it. But in baseball, there has always been a rule, still is a rule, that no player's contract is valid unless it is signed by the man who owns the club. In other words, the man who pays for it must sign it before it becomes valid. So that in baseball alone, compared to some of these other industries, is there this check and balance system, because the guy who pays for it out of his pocket is the guy who decides whether he will sign it or not. And that's a far better system than appointing a bunch of toadies who are not going to pay for it to decide your compensation.
And these owners wouldn't be giving out these big salaries unless they thought it was worthwhile on some level, and you have to think that that's a financial level.
Yeah, no question about it. Now, let me hasten to add, to be super fair here. We're all human beings, and we all make mistakes. Does an owner ever overrate a player? Yes. He may, for various reasons, including false abilities to be a scout and decide the potential of a player. He may well make a mistake, and you may find here and there a player who is overpaid in the sense of what market value really is.
Here's what I don't get though. All you did for baseball, the salaries increased. You helped the players, helped the former players. The pensions went up, everything like that. You take a guy like Gene Upshaw at the NFL getting $12 million a year. He did nothing for the former players. Do you kind of think to yourself, I should have went and helped the NFL players?
Yeah. Well, but you have to understand that take the last two. You're talking about Hall of Fame votes?
Right. Oh, yeah. They're not even looking at you because you upset the owners.
Yeah, well, you have to understand, the last two votes, about 2 years ago and 5 years ago, I received the unanimous vote of every single player on those two different committees over a 5-year period. I received a 100% vote, not a 75% vote, but a 100% vote of every player on those committees who was voting, who was not a management person following the end of his baseball playing career. They would put ex-players on the committee, some of whom had been management people for longer periods than they ever were players. And some of them were people who didn't know me from Adam. They were pre-union players. They didn't have the faintest idea of what I did or what the union did. But if you left them to one side and just took the players whose connection to baseball ended with the end of their playing careers, I got 100% of their vote in each of those two elections. And in addition, the media people on each of those committees, I got 100% of the vote in each of those two votes from the media. Now, just to put it in perspective, Babe Ruth didn't get 100% of the vote from the media, nor Ted Williams, nor Joe DiMaggio, and on like that. So all you're talking about, and the votes that failed by one, like last time, 11 votes instead of 12. All you're talking about is the management has always managed to put management people in sufficient number on a committee so that you can't get 75%. If in a committee, it's like the last one, there were 16 people voting, and you needed 12, and they made sure they had 5 or more management people so that you couldn't get to 12. And they did the same 3 years before that when the voting committee was 12 and you needed 9 votes to be elected. They made sure that the management people numbered 4 or more, and so that you couldn't get 9 votes. So it's a straight rigging of the committee, and it's not the former players who are failing to vote for me. When in each time it's a former player on a voting committee, as long as he is not currently a management person afraid of losing his job, and his only job he's got, as long as he's not in that category, I've been getting 100% of the vote. And as somebody said, you can't do better than that.
Thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you.
And you're a Hall of Famer in our book. And anybody who knows anything about baseball knows you should be in.
Well, I thank you. And yeah, look, just to get it straight, some things are past their time, and this is one of them. It doesn't distress me. In some ways, you know, when I look at the vote and find that all of the players who are not management voted for me, and all of the media voted for me, that's satisfaction enough. You know, I'm not a child. You're up against a rigged election. You don't expect anything. I never did expect it, frankly, because I know what they're capable of, and it doesn't distress me. And you may not know it, but I have asked repeatedly in writing to leave me off the ballot because I'm not interested, and they ignore it, and they put me on the ballot, and then they rig the thing so I can't be elected, and that's silly.
No,
and
it is. Thank you so much. You're absolutely right. But you know what? You did your job. You're the head of the Players Association, and you took care of the players, and they show it by voting for you every time. So you should be proud of that. Thank you again.
I am, and I enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
That was should-be Hall of Famer Marvin Miller. We want to thank our guest today, Marvin Miller. We also want to thank Laria Daniels and her sound men for doing another great job. Dave
Does he have a name?
Dave Olson.
Okay.
You're listening to Sports and Torts. Tune in again next week. Thank you.